In the winter of 1931, rescue teams found two bodies in the broken Cumberland mine tunnel. They were sitting in a way that didn't make sense until someone looked at the letters hidden in one man's coat pocket. What those letters showed would make an entire cold town face a truth they had tried to hide for many years. Before we start the story, if you're the kind of person who loves discovering secret histories and unexplored stories that change how we understand the past, click the like button and subscribe. It's interesting seeing viewers from early mornings, afternoons to late nights. So, tell me the city you're watching from and the exact time you're seeing this. Now let's continue with the story. The collapse happened at 4:17 in the afternoon on January 12, 1931. The Cumberland Mine's number 7 tunnel fell without warning, trapping 11 men in tunnels that went nearly 2,000 feet beneath the frozen ground of eastern Kentucky. Rescue work began within the hour, bringing in helpers from 3 nearby counties and using every resource the mining company could spare without stopping work completely. By the next morning, 9 men had been pulled from the rocks. 6 were alive, 3 were not. The remaining 2, Thomas Garrett and William Brennan, were found in a part of the tunnel that shouldn't have had anyone in it at all. Their work schedules put them nearly 300 yards from where their bodies were finally discovered in a side passage used mainly for storing equipment and rarely visited during active work. How the bodies were positioned seemed strange to the first people who found them. Frank Dalton, the crew leader who found them, wrote in his first report that both men were sitting against the tunnel wall, facing each other with less than 2 feet of space between them. Neither showed signs of trying to dig through the collapse or move toward possible exit paths. Their miners' lamps had burned out, but both were still strapped correctly to their helmets, showing they'd been awake and purposeful in their final hours. Thomas Garrett, age 34, had worked the Cumberland mine for 11 years. Company records said he was reliable, skilled with explosives, and often asked for the more technical parts of tunnel expansion. He rented a room at the Wickham House on Slate Creek Road and sent money each month to a sister in Ohio, though later investigation would show no such sister existed. William Brennan, 29, had arrived in Cumberland 5 years earlier with papers claiming previous mine work in southwestern Virginia. His references checked out, though the mines he'd supposedly worked at no longer existed by the time anyone thought to check his history. He'd lived in company housing, shared a cabin with 2 other unmarried men, and kept what everyone described as an ordinary life. The medical examiner who looked at both bodies, Dr. Raymond Pritchett, found no immediate signs of crushing injuries despite the nature of the collapse. Both men had died from lack of oxygen as air ran out in their sealed section of tunnel. What Pritchett noticed, but at first kept from his official report, were the personal items found in Garrett's coat. A bundle of letters tied with string, each one addressed in Brennan's distinctive handwriting, each one never sent. The letters came to light 3 weeks after the funeral, not through official channels, but through the careful work of Agnes Holloway, a county clerk processing estate paperwork in a basement office that smelled of mold and old paper. She'd been assigned to list personal belongings for the families of the deceased, a sad administrative task that followed every mining disaster in eastern Kentucky. Garrett's belongings were few. A savings account with $47, $2 changes of clothes, a straight razor, a Bible with no writing inside, and the bundle of letters that Dr. Pritchett had quietly passed along without including them in the public record, understanding right away that whatever they contained wasn't meant for everyone to see. Agnes opened the first letter on a Tuesday morning in early February. The handwriting was careful, almost delicate in how precise it was, each word placed with obvious care. It was dated April 1927 and began without introduction. I think of Tuesday afternoons when the light comes through at that particular angle, and I wonder if you notice it too. She read 3 more before she understood what she was holding. The words were coded, careful, filled with references that meant nothing on the surface, but created clear meaning when you read them all together. Talk of shared work shifts and the place near the air shaft where sound doesn't carry, mentions of that book you showed me, and the way you explained the timber patterns. Details about rearranged living situations, and carefully planned days off that lined up with suspicious precision. The letters covered 4 years. The earliest ones kept careful distance, discussing work and weather and the everyday rhythms of mine life. But as months turned into years, the pretending became thinner. By 1929, Brennan was writing things that couldn't be misunderstood. I would rather spend one honest hour with you than a lifetime of acceptable lies. Agnes found herself reading late into the evening, long after other clerks had left. The letters showed a relationship conducted entirely in stolen moments and carefully built alibis. Shift trades that put both men on the same schedule. Living arrangements that moved between different houses, creating the appearance of restlessness while actually making it easier to be close. A pocket watch that Brennan mentioned buying, so we might know the same time even when separated. Each man carrying an identical timepiece bought from a catalog that required no local purchase. What struck Agnes most strongly was the planning evident in every sentence. These weren't impulsive men caught in momentary passion. They'd built an entire hidden life within the rigid structure of coal camp life, where privacy didn't exist and everyone's business became common knowledge. They'd managed it for 4 years without apparent discovery, which suggested either extraordinary care or everyone choosing not to see. One letter from October 1930 detailed a close call. Someone had made a comment about them always taking breaks near the same tunnel section. Brennan described how they deliberately stayed apart for 2 months, working different shifts and avoiding any public interaction until suspicion faded and routine swallowed the observation. "It nearly killed me," he wrote, "being that close and having to pretend you were just another face in the drift." The final letter was dated January 4, 1931, 8 days before the collapse. It was shorter than the others, written in haste or under emotional stress. "If something happens, if we run out of time before we run out of reasons to hide, I need you to know that every moment was worth it, every risk, every careful lie. You were the only true thing in my life." Agnes sat in the silent office with the letters spread before her on the worn wooden desk. Outside, February wind rattled the window frames. She thought about the 2 men found facing each other in a tunnel they had no documented reason to enter, in a section of the mine where they had no written reason to be. She thought about choices and consequences and the suffocating weight of acceptable lies. Then she did something that would later cost her the job she'd held for 6 years. She made copies of everything. The mine employment records told one story. Census documents told another. When placed side by side, the gaps between them showed the careful architecture of 2 lives built specifically to create possibility where none should exist. Thomas Garrett first appeared in Cumberland's records in 1920. His hiring papers listed previous experience in Pennsylvania coal mines and provided a reference from a supervisor named Dutch Keller. The address for Keller's mine was accurate. The supervisor himself had never existed. Nobody checked because workers were scarce, and Garrett showed competence within his first week underground. His living arrangement at the Wickham house seemed straightforward. A single room paid monthly with meals included, but property records showed something odd. Between 1923 and 1930, Garrett moved residences 7 times, never staying more than 14 months in any location. Each move followed the same pattern. He'd give notice, disappear for 2 weeks, claiming to visit his sister in Ohio, then reappear in a new living situation across town. William Brennan's housing history followed an opposite rhythm. He moved 6 times in 5 years, always relocating within a month of Garrett settling somewhere new. The distances between their residences varied from 8 blocks to nearly 2 miles, but a detailed map of Cumberland showed something that wouldn't have been obvious to casual observation. Every pairing placed them within walking distance of the same section of the Green River, a stretch of waterfront where the rail yards created enough industrial noise to hide conversation. Company housing logs provided further evidence of coordination. Mine work operated on rotating shifts, day rotation, evening rotation, and the dreaded graveyard shift that ran from midnight to 8:00 in the morning. Most miners hated the overnight hours and avoided them whenever possible. Garrett and Brennan both volunteered for graveyard rotation with suspicious frequency, often during the same weeks. The shift trading records were particularly revealing. Between 1927 and 1930, Garrett had traded shifts 43 times. 41 of those trades resulted in him working the same rotation as Brennan. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidence, but too spread out to trigger immediate notice from supervisors focused on production numbers rather than social dynamics. Census records from 1930 added another layer of deception. Garrett listed himself as single with 1 dependent sister in Cincinnati. Brennan claimed to be widowed with 2 young children living with his late wife's family in Roanoke. When Agnes Holloway cross-checked these claims with birth, death, and marriage records from both cities, she found nothing. No sister, no wife, no children, just names carefully chosen to explain away money sent to post office boxes that upon investigation belonged to the men themselves. The most complex element of their parallel lives involved their finances. Both men kept savings accounts at different banks, but they also shared a third account opened under the name of a non-existent business, Garrett and Brennan Supply. The account, discovered only because Agnes had connections at the regional banking office, contained deposits from both men covering 3 years. The total had reached nearly $300 by January 1931, a large sum for coal miners whose weekly wages rarely exceeded $12. There were no withdrawals. The money simply accumulated as if they were saving towards something specific. A deposit slip from December 1930 included a note in Brennan's handwriting, "For when we can finally stop pretending." Agnes found a travel brochure folded inside one of the later letters. It advertised timber work opportunities in western Oregon, specifically in remote lumber camps where crews lived in isolation, and questions about a man's past were considered impolite. Someone had circled the mailing address and written a single word beside it: maybe. They'd been planning an escape, building a fund, researching locations far enough from eastern Kentucky that two men arriving together might raise fewer questions than they would in coal country. They'd been building an exit from lives that required them to live as strangers while being the most important person in each other's existence. They appeared to be close to leaving their old lives behind, yet the collapse ended any chance they might have had. The diary appeared 37 years after the collapse, donated to the Cumberland County Historical Society by the widow of Herbert Lansing, who'd served as night shift supervisor at the mine from 1926 until his retirement in 1942. She found it while clearing out his workshop, wrapped in waterproof cloth and hidden behind a false panel he'd built in his tool cabinet. Lansing's entries were brief and factual, the observations of a man trained to notice details that affected productivity and safety. He documented equipment failures, worker disputes, and the small rule breaking that never made it into official reports but shaped the daily reality of mine operations. Most entries ran 3 or 4 lines. A handful stretched longer, and it was these that revealed what Lansing had seen but never acted upon. The first significant entry came from August 1928. Garrett and Brennan both requested transfer to Section 9, said the airflow was better. Airflow is identical to Section 7 where they've been working. Approved the transfer because they're 2 of the best powdermen I have and I don't need them unhappy, but something about the request felt rehearsed. 3 months later, another observation. Found Brennan's lunch pail in Section 12 after shift end. He claimed he'd gotten turned around in the dark, but Brennan has been underground for 4 years and doesn't get lost. Section 12 is where Garrett was working solo on timber replacement. Coincidence feels unlikely. January 1929 brought a more troubling entry. Caught them together during meal break in the air junction near Shaft 4. They were just talking. Nothing I could point to as wrong, but the way they separated when they heard me coming was too quick, too guilty, like children caught passing notes in school. Said nothing because what would I say? That 2 men shouldn't talk privately. But I've been in mines for 23 years and I know what hiding looks like. Lansing's awareness created an impossible situation, one he documented with increasing discomfort over the following months. He noted how other miners had started making jokes, nothing explicit, but edged with mockery. How Garrett and Brennan had become more careful, never breaking at the same time, always maintaining visible distance during shift changes. How this very carefulness seemed to confirm what people were beginning to suspect. April 1929 contained the entry that revealed Lansing's choice. Dalton asked me today if I'd noticed anything strange about Garrett and Brennan. Said some of the men were talking. I told him I hadn't seen anything worth reporting and that gossip was poison in a mine where men's lives depend on trust. This was a lie. I have seen. But I've also seen that they're careful, professional, and better at their jobs than half the crew combined. What they do on their own time is none of my concern, so long as it doesn't affect safety underground. But it was an entry from June 1930 that proved Lansing understood more than he'd admitted. Brennan showed up to shift with bruising on his face, said he'd walked into a door. Men don't get that kind of bruising from doors. Someone confronted him, maybe followed him, maybe wanted to make a point. Asked him directly if he needed help or wanted to file a complaint. He said no and looked at me like I'd offered him poison instead of protection. What kind of world have we built where a man can't even accept help without it destroying him? The final relevant entry came January 10, 1931, 2 days before the collapse. Garrett requested assignment to Section 7 tomorrow, storage tunnel maintenance. Brennan made the same request an hour later through different channels, probably thinking I wouldn't notice. I approved both. I'm not sure why. Maybe because I'm tired of watching them pretend. Maybe because after all these years of careful distance, they've decided they need one honest moment more than they need safety. I understand that impulse more than I should. Beneath this entry, added in different ink at a later date, Lansing had written just 5 words. I should have said no. The Cumberland Mining Company filed for bankruptcy in 1947, 16 years after the collapse that killed Thomas Garrett and William Brennan. During asset sale, company letters dating back to 1923 were transferred to state archives, where they sat largely unexamined until a graduate student researching labor history stumbled across a sequence of letters that revealed management had known far more than they'd ever acknowledged. The relevant letters began in October 1929, when a shift supervisor named Clayton Voss wrote to the company's regional director. We have a situation developing with 2 of the powder crew that requires delicate handling. There's talk among the men that's creating division and affecting morale. However, both individuals in question are among our most skilled workers, and losing either would significantly impact our expansion timeline. Request guidance on appropriate action. The regional director's response came 3 weeks later. Your concern is noted. However, unless the situation directly impacts production or creates documented safety violations, company policy is to avoid intervention in personal matters. Monitor the situation, but take no action unless workplace performance deteriorates. Skilled demolition experts are difficult to replace. This established a pattern that continued for over a year. Voss sent periodic updates, each one documenting growing tension among the workforce while simultaneously praising Garrett and Brennan's technical abilities. In March 1930, he wrote, "The situation has not improved. 3 men requested transfers away from the night crew specifically to avoid working alongside the individuals previously discussed. However, tunnel expansion in Section 9 is ahead of schedule due primarily to their expertise with controlled explosives. Production numbers remain strong." What emerged from the letters was a calculated corporate decision. Cumberland Mining Company understood exactly what was happening, but chose economic convenience over social enforcement. Garrett and Brennan were too valuable to lose, and their private relationship, however scandalous to their coworkers, never interfered with their ability to place charges precisely, bring down rock faces efficiently, or teach newer workers in powder handling. A letter from the company's legal advisor in July 1930 made the calculation explicit. While certain behaviors may violate community standards, they do not violate any contractual obligations or workplace safety regulations. Termination without documented cause could expose the company to wrongful dismissal claims. Furthermore, training replacement powdermen requires 6 months minimum and significant capital investment. Recommendation is to maintain current employment status while monitoring for any actionable violations. The letters revealed something darker than simple tolerance. Management actively protected Garrett and Brennan from consequences, not out of progressive values, but cold financial logic. When a group of miners submitted a formal complaint in September 1930 demanding removal of immoral elements from the workforce, the regional director responded, "Your concerns are acknowledged, but do not constitute grounds for termination under company policy. Workers who find current assignments unsuitable may request transfers, though such transfers cannot be guaranteed." The final piece of correspondence came from November 1930, 2 months before the collapse. The company president wrote to the regional director, "Regarding your inquiry about the ongoing situation with employees Garrett and Brennan, company position remains unchanged. Both men have exemplary safety records and production outputs that exceed crew averages by 18%. Whatever personal arrangements they maintain are immaterial to company interests, provided work quality remains consistent. Ta. Key no action." Attached to this letter was a handwritten note likely never meant for the official file. "We tolerate what's profitable and prosecute what's not. Remember that next time anyone accuses us of having principles." The letters painted a portrait of institutional cynicism that used 2 men's vulnerability as leverage, while simultaneously exposing them to workplace hostility it refused to address. Cumberland Mining Company didn't protect Garrett and Brennan because it was right. It protected them because replacing skilled powdermen cost more than ignoring the complaints of workers who could be easily replaced themselves. They were valuable assets, not human beings deserving dignity. And when they died, the company's only documented response was a standard condolence letter and a note that replacement personnel would need to be hired within 30 days to maintain production schedules. The Cumberland Courier published its account of the mine collapse on January 14, 1931, under the headline, "11 Trapped in Mine Disaster." The article ran 800 words across 3 columns detailing rescue efforts, listing the deceased and quoting company officials about safety improvements. What it didn't mention were the personal belongings recovered from the bodies, the unusual location where 2 men were found, or any detail that might invite questions about why Thomas Garrett and William Brennan died together in a tunnel they had no documented reason to enter. The newspaper's editorial choices weren't accidental. Warren Kemp, the Courier's editor from 1927 through 1946, kept careful notes about stories his paper declined to pursue. These notes, preserved by his daughter and later donated to the Kentucky Press Association archives, revealed the mechanics of collective silence in a town where everyone knew what couldn't be said. Kemp's notes from January 19, 1931, received tip from courthouse source about letters found with Garrett's body. Content apparently suggests relationship of intimate nature between deceased miners. Decision made not to pursue story. Families have suffered enough without public speculation. Also, Cumberland Mining Company is our largest advertiser. The economic calculation was stated plainly. The Courier depended on mining company advertising revenue for roughly 40% of its operating budget. Antagonizing that relationship by publishing details that reflected poorly on company workforce would have been financial suicide for a small-town newspaper already struggling through the Depression. But Kemp's notes suggested something more complex than simple economic pressure. An entry from February 1931 described a conversation with Frank Dalton, the supervisor who discovered the bodies. Dalton came to the office today, clearly agitated, said he'd been thinking about what he saw in that tunnel and it didn't sit right. The men looked peaceful, he said, like they'd made a choice. Asked me directly if I planned to write anything about the letters. Told him no. He seemed relieved, but also disappointed, as if he wanted someone to acknowledge what he'd witnessed, but was afraid of what that acknowledgement might cost. The pattern repeated across Cumberland's institutional memory. The funeral home director who prepared both bodies for burial noted in his private records that both men's families requested closed caskets and quick services with minimal public viewing. The pastor who conducted Garrett's service kept a journal entry describing the sparse attendance. Only 8 mourners present, none claiming close relationship to deceased. Service felt performative, as if we were burying a stranger rather than a man who'd lived here 11 years. Brennan's funeral drew even fewer attendees. His service was held the same afternoon as Garrett's at a different church across town, ensuring the 2 events couldn't overlap. No flowers were sent. No obituary appeared in the Courier beyond the basic death notice required by law. Most revealing were the conversations Kemp documented from local businesses in the weeks following the collapse. The owner of Brennan's boarding house told Kemp that 2 men had come asking questions about Brennan's habits and visitors. The Wickham house, where Garrett had lived, reported similar inquiries. In both cases, the questioners weren't law enforcement or journalists, but ordinary citizens conducting unofficial investigations into matters they considered morally urgent. Kemp wrote in March 1931, "The town has decided to forget these men ever existed. Their names will fade from conversation. The circumstances of their deaths will remain unexamined. This collective forgetting serves everyone's interests except truth. I'm complicit in this erasure, and I'm not certain how to feel about that, except relieved that I won't have to defend publishing something that would destroy what little piece their memories might otherwise retain." The silence became self-reinforcing, FAMI. Lies moved away or refused to discuss their deceased relatives. Company records were archived without commentary. Newspaper accounts became the official history, cleaned up and incomplete. By 1940, anyone asking about Thomas Garrett and William Brennan would find nothing but the barest facts. 2 miners killed in a collapse, buried separately, mourned by no one who would speak publicly about their grief. January 12, 1931 began like most winter Mondays in Cumberland. Temperature at dawn was 14 degrees. Ice covered the Green River in sheets thick enough to walk across. The mine whistle sounded at 5:30 in the morning, summoning the day shift workers who would descend into tunnels where temperature held constant at 57 degrees regardless of surface conditions. Thomas Garrett and William Brennan weren't scheduled for day shift. Their rotation placed them on evening crew starting at 2:00 in the afternoon and ending at 10 at night. Yet both men arrived at the mine shortly after 6:00 in the morning, more than 7 hours before their assigned time. The shift record keeper, a man named Paul Ridley, documented their early arrival in the Daily Register. His note was matter of fact. Garrett and Brennan reported for Maintenance Duty Section 7 Storage Tunnel Foreman Authorization. Herbert Lansing had approved their request 2 days earlier, assigning them to inspect timber supports and replace deteriorated beams in a section of tunnel used primarily for equipment storage. Section 7 Storage Tunnel wasn't critical infrastructure. It connected to active mining areas, but saw minimal daily traffic. The work assigned to Garrett and Brennan could have been completed by any competent crew and didn't require two of the mine's most skilled powdermen. Yet nobody questioned the assignment because maintenance work was constant work and someone had to do it. Weather records from that day show clear skies but bitter cold. The Cumberland Courier's weather note recorded wind speeds of 15 mph from the northwest, creating wind chill factors that made outdoor work nearly unbearable. Underground would have felt warm by comparison, a refuge from the brutal January morning. Both men descended into the mine at 6:43, carrying standard equipment: timber inspection tools, replacement support beams, safety lamps, and their personal lunch pails. 3 other workers saw them enter the cage elevator. None reported anything unusual about their behavior or conversation. They were simply 2 miners reporting for an unremarkable maintenance shift. The collapse occurred at 4:17 that afternoon. Earthquake monitoring equipment at the University of Kentucky, over 100 miles away, recorded a minor tremor consistent with underground structural failure. Within the mine, the sound was described by survivors as initially subtle: a groaning of stressed timber followed by a crack sharp enough to echo through multiple tunnel sections. Section 9, where most of the day's shift crew was working, experienced the most severe damage. Rockfall blocked 3 primary passages and trapped 11 men in various locations throughout the tunnel network. Emergency procedures activated immediately. Surface crews began rescue operations within 20 minutes of the collapse. What nobody understood initially was that Section 7, where Garrett and Brennan had been working, wasn't part of the primary collapse area. The tunnel network was extensive, with Section 7 positioned nearly 300 yards from Section 9. Structural failure in one area shouldn't have affected the other based on the mine's documented geology and timber support system. Yet when rescue crews finally reached Section 7 at approximately 8:30 that evening, they found the storage tunnel completely sealed by rockfall. The collapse had originated from a sideways crack, a type of failure that occurred when pressure built along horizontal stress lines rather than vertical ones. Such collapses were rare and typically resulted from either geological instability or compromised support structures. Mining engineer reports completed in the weeks following the disaster noted several irregularities. Timber supports in Section 7 showed signs of deliberate weakening, with support beams that appeared to have been partially cut through before the collapse. Air shafts that should have remained open were found blocked with debris that seemed intentionally placed rather than accidentally fallen. The report's author, a man named Douglas Kimmel, included a carefully worded observation. Physical evidence suggests the possibility that structural integrity in Section 7 storage tunnel may have been deliberately compromised prior to the collapse event. However, definitive conclusions cannot be drawn from available evidence. His report was filed with the State Mining Authority and never publicly released. Douglas Kimmel's engineering report sat in state archives for 43 years before anyone examined it closely, when a researcher named Janet Cora. In reviewed mine disaster documentation in 1974, she found Kimmel's carefully neutral language concealed questions he'd been unwilling to state directly. The technical details were damning once understood. Section 7, storage tunnel, had been inspected just 6 weeks before the collapse in late November 1930. The inspection report signed by Herbert Lansing noted all timber supports as structurally sound with no immediate maintenance required. Yet Kimmel's post-collapse analysis found multiple beams showing saw marks consistent with deliberate cutting, reducing their load-bearing capacity by approximately 40%. More troubling was the air shaft evidence. Section 7 connected to the main air system through 2 auxiliary shafts designed to maintain air circulation even if primary passages were blocked. Both shafts were found filled with loose rock and timber debris in arrangements that Kimmel described as geometrically improbable for natural collapse patterns. His report included a diagram showing debris placement. The rocks weren't randomly scattered, but stacked in a way that maximized blockage while using minimal material. Someone with knowledge of mine air systems had deliberately blocked airflow to Section 7, transforming what should have been a survivable sealed tunnel into an airtight tomb. Kimmel interviewed the 3 workers who'd seen Garrett and Brennan enter the mine that morning. All 3 reported the same detail. Both men carried unusually heavy packs in addition to standard equipment. When asked what the packs might have contained, the workers assumed extra timber or tools, but inventory records showed all necessary materials for the maintenance assignment had been staged at Section 7 the previous day. The timeline created additional questions. The collapse occurred at 4:17 in the afternoon. Garrett and Brennan had entered the mine at 6:43 that morning, giving them nearly 10 hours underground before the structural failure. The maintenance work they'd been assigned should have required 4 hours maximum. What had they been doing for the remaining 6 hours? Kimmel's report noted this discrepancy, but offered no speculation. He did, however, document something discovered during debris removal, fresh tool marks on tunnel walls in Section 7 that hadn't existed during the November inspection. Someone had been excavating or modifying the tunnel structure in the weeks before the collapse. The most significant finding came from analysis of the collapse mechanism itself. Rockfalls in coal mines typically resulted from either roof failure, where gravity pulled unsupported ceiling material downward, or wall failure, where sideways pressure caused sidewall collapse. Section 7 showed characteristics of both simultaneously, a combination that occurred naturally only under extraordinary geological stress. But geological surveys of the area showed no such stress. The rock formations surrounding Section 7 were stable, with no history of earthquake activity or structural weakness. The collapse should not have happened at all, let alone in the specific pattern that sealed the tunnel so completely. Kimmel's report included testimony from a miner named Vincent Healy, who worked in Section 6, next to Section 7. Healy reported hearing what sounded like controlled explosions around 3:00 in the afternoon, approximately an hour before the main collapse. When asked why he hadn't reported this at the time, Healy explained that powder work was common enough that he'd assumed someone had authorization for blasting. But Section 7 wasn't approved for any explosive work that day. Garrett and Brennan were authorized only for timber maintenance, which required no explosions. If Healy had heard explosives, someone was conducting unauthorized blasting in a section of tunnel they'd deliberately weakened and whose airflow they'd systematically blocked. Kimmel concluded his report with a statement that read like reluctant honesty. The physical evidence presents 2 possible explanations. Either Section 7 experienced a geological event unprecedented in regional mining history, or the collapse was engineered through deliberate structural sabotage. Given the technical expertise required for such sabotage, any responsible party would necessarily possess extensive knowledge of mine engineering and explosives handling. He never named Garrett and Brennan. He didn't need to. Both men were among the mine's most skilled powder experts. Both had spent their final morning in a tunnel they'd requested access to, carrying equipment they hadn't needed, working alone for hours they couldn't account for. The question wasn't whether they'd caused the collapse. The question was whether they'd done it to themselves. The personal belongings recovered from Section 7 told a story that rescue workers initially couldn't understand. Both men's lunch pails were found unopened, suggesting they'd never eaten, despite being underground for nearly 10 hours. Their safety lamps had burned through their fuel supply completely, indicating the lamps had remained lit until oxygen depletion extinguished them. Most significantly, both men wore their pocket watches, the timepieces Brennan had mentioned in his letters, purchased so they might know the same time even when separated. Both were identical silver pieces manufactured by the Hamilton Watch Company. Both had stopped at 4:38 in the afternoon, 21 minutes after the initial collapse, preserved by the medical examiner as part of the death inventory. Dr. Pritchett's examination revealed additional details that never entered public record. Neither man showed defensive wounds or signs of panic. Their hands weren't scraped or bloodied from attempting to dig through rockfall. Their clothing remained largely intact, without the tears and damage typical of men caught in a collapse who fought for survival. What Pritchett found instead was deliberate arrangement. Both men had removed their helmets and placed them carefully aside. They'd positioned themselves facing each other against the tunnel wall with their backs supported, as if settling in for a long wait. In Garrett's right hand was a small wooden carving roughly shaped like a bird in flight, with Brennan's initials carved into the base. The carving had been mentioned in one of the letters. Brennan wrote about it in June 1929. "You asked what I wanted for my birthday, and I told you nothing because wanting things felt dangerous. But you carved that small hawk anyway and left it where I'd find it. I carry it with me now, a reminder that someone sees me as something other than what this place demands I be." Inside Brennan's coat pocket, rescue workers found a folded piece of paper with a single sentence written in Garrett's handwriting. "Whatever happens, we decided together." The paper was dated January 11th, the day before the collapse. The travel brochure for Oregon timber camps was there too, creased from repeated folding, with specific camps circled and notes in the margins about hiring seasons and pay rates. But there was also a second document, a letter neither man had mailed, addressed to Herbert Lansing. The letter was brief. "By the time you read this, we'll be gone one way or another. We want you to know this wasn't your fault. You gave us more kindness than we had any right to expect in a place like this. You looked away when others would have looked closer, and that mercy meant everything. We're sorry for any trouble this causes you, but we've run out of ways to keep living the way we've been living. Some doors only open one way." Janet Corwin's research in 1974 uncovered one additional piece of evidence that had been deliberately excluded from official records. A mine surveyor doing routine mapping 3 days before the collapse had noted fresh excavation work in Section 7 that wasn't authorized on any work order. He'd reported this to management, but his report had been filed without investigation because Section 7 wasn't active mining territory, and unauthorized modifications weren't considered urgent concerns. The excavation matched the location where rescue crews eventually found Garrett and Brennan. They hadn't been caught by an unexpected collapse. They'd been sitting in a section of tunnel they'd specifically prepared, having weakened supports they understood intimately, having blocked air shafts they'd helped install years earlier. The physical evidence suggested they'd had approximately 3 hours after sealing themselves in before oxygen depletion would have become critical. 3 hours sitting together in the dark, no longer hiding, no longer pretending, finally able to exist honestly in the only place and time that would permit it. The mining company's private investigation, never publicly released, reached a conclusion that management found legally convenient: accidental death caused by unforeseen structural failure. Acknowledging any other possibility would have raised questions about why 2 skilled miners might choose such an ending, and those questions led to truths Cumberland Mining Company had already decided to ignore. According to some interpretations of archived materials, the records may suggest a version of events that was never publicly acknowledged. Each piece of evidence was separated, archived in different locations, made invisible through deliberate dispersal. The Cumberland mine closed in 1953, its coal reserves depleted, and its equipment outdated beyond profitable operation. The tunnels were sealed according to state mining regulations, with concrete barriers installed at main shaft entrances to prevent unauthorized access. For 21 years, Section 7 remained buried beneath tons of rock and earth, its secrets preserved in darkness. Then in 1974, the Federal Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act required cleanup of abandoned mine sites that posed environmental or safety hazards. Cumberland Mine qualified for cleanup funding due to documented groundwater contamination and ground sinking risks threatening nearby residential areas. The cleanup crew arrived in April 1974, hired to stabilize existing tunnels and properly seal all passages according to updated safety standards. The project required mapping the complete tunnel network, a task complicated by incomplete company records and 43 years of deterioration. It was during this mapping process that Crew Chief Michael Strand discovered Section 7 wasn't where the archived blueprints indicated it should be. Ground-penetrating radar showed empty spaces that didn't match documented tunnel layouts. On May 3, 1974, Strand's team broke through a concrete barrier that had been installed not in 1953 during official closure, but sometime earlier, based on concrete composition analysis that dated it to approximately 1931. Behind that barrier was Section 7 storage tunnel, sealed immediately after the collapse and never officially reopened. When Strand's team entered with modern lighting and breathing equipment, they found a scene preserved almost exactly as rescue workers had left it 43 years earlier. The tunnel showed clear evidence of the collapse pattern Kimmel had documented: weakened support beams, deliberately blocked air shafts, tool marks on walls where unauthorized excavation had modified the tunnel structure. But Strand's team discovered something that earlier investigations had either missed or deliberately excluded from official reports. 20 feet from where Garrett and Brennan's bodies had been found, the tunnel branched into an emergency access passage. This passage, clearly marked on the original mine blueprints, led to a secondary shaft that would have provided escape from the sealed section. The passage was unblocked. The route was clear. Both men would have known it existed because that emergency access was precisely the kind of detail powdermen memorized as part of their safety training. The emergency passage existed, but whether the two men were aware of its location or condition that day remains unclear. Strand's team found one more piece of evidence in that emergency passage: a miner's helmet positioned deliberately on the ground with a handwritten note tucked inside, protected by waterproof cloth wrapping that had kept it readable across 4 decades. The note was in Garrett's handwriting: "We know about the emergency shaft. We're not trapped. We're choosing. Please understand the difference." The discovery forced a reckoning that Cumberland had avoided for 43 years. These men hadn't been victims of an unfortunate accident. Some interpretations of scattered evidence have led later researchers to speculate about their intentions during those final hours, though nothing can be concluded with certainty. They'd used their expertise with explosives and mine structure to create a space that existed outside the suffocating social codes of 1930s Appalachia. The cleanup project was completed in August 1974. Section 7 was properly sealed according to modern standards, but before the final concrete was poured, Strand did something that violated his contract specifications. He left the emergency passage unsealed and installed a small brass plaque at its entrance. The plaque bore no names, just 2 dates: January 12, 1931 and May 3, 1974, separated by the word "remembered." Janet Corwin's research, combined with the physical evidence from the cleanup project, was compiled into a comprehensive historical account published in 1976. The account identified Garrett and Brennan by name for the first time in public record and documented the full scope of their relationship, their careful planning, and their final choice. The publication caused minimal controversy, partly because everyone who'd enforced Cumberland's silence was dead or too old to care, but mostly because by 1976, the world had begun admitting that people like Thomas Garrett and William Brennan had always existed, even in places that pretended otherwise. Their story entered local retellings and later historical discussions, though documentation remains fragmented and interpretive, not as a tragedy to be hidden, but as a truth that demanded acknowledgement. Two men who loved each other in a time and place that offered them no legitimate way to exist, and who chose 3 hours of honest darkness over a lifetime of acceptable lies. If stories like this remind you why history matters, why hidden truths deserve acknowledgement, and why the people written out of the record still deserve to be remembered, click the like button and subscribe. These aren't just stories from the past. They're reminders that courage has always existed, even in the darkest places.